We close out the month of July 2024 and head into August. Let's take a look at the temperatures over the past 30 days. We've had some rather cool weather all the way from Texas up to the Midwest, but on the West Coast, temperatures significantly above normal. And of course, Las Vegas reached 120 degrees just a couple weeks ago. Here on Forecast Lab, we don't use those cheap graphics that you see elsewhere on other channels. We use actual products used by forecasters, and I was a forecaster myself. We've got AWIPS on here. This is showing us some of the fields that we look at. The 500 millibar chart, this is used for checking out the subtropical high. We've got pretty much the center right there across Dallas and Waco. Prevailing westerlies up to the north, and a little bit of monsoon flow out there in Arizona and New Mexico. Heading up to the jet stream level, the polar front jet does tend to recede during the summer, but it does not go away completely. We find it from the Gulf of Alaska into British Columbia and Alberta, so things are quite active out there in the Gulf of Alaska. One branch of the polar front jet in the northern plains, feeding some of this activity we're going to look at shortly in Nebraska and Iowa. We do see that subtropical high, even up at 250 millibars. This is going to be 34,000 feet, near the top of the troposphere, and that's got that subtropical high right there across Dallas, and elongated all the way from Birmingham back to Roswell, New Mexico. And we do see that southerly flow through the southwestern region. And when we get that southerly flow, it does tap into the tropical moisture. There it is, advancing into Arizona. And there's the result early this morning. Numerous nocturnal thunderstorms still going on after dawn across Old Mexico. And then we get new development out there around Nogales, Tucson, Douglas, and those long anvils streaming northward, indicating that there's some decent bulk shear, helping to produce some long-lived structures in those convective clusters. There's a look at the current WSR 88D radar. Storms have moved through the Tucson area earlier this afternoon, and now we've got most of those out there near Sells, up to Casa Grande, pretty much out in the southwestern deserts, and they may advance on the Ajo area. Where's Ajo? Let me see if I can bring up the cities. How do we do that? I guess we don't have them on here, but that's going to be roughly in this area right here. More cells down to the south of Nogales into Old Mexico. So this is a very common thing that we see on radar this time of year. There's also blowing dust advisories across all of the lower deserts, as there could be strong outflow with some of these cells. And here you can see the vast change in the weather. Nogales 69 degrees, very cool weather compared to 77 at Tucson and 110 at Phoenix. Elsewhere around the country, here's what we're looking at. We've got a polar front moving through the Dakotas into Nebraska, northwestern Kansas. Not very much cold air behind that. Temperatures in the lower 90s from Pierre down to North Platte. Out ahead of it, some very hot air, though, up to 105 around Russell, 104 at Dodge City, and 102 at Amarillo. The Storm Prediction Center has an enhanced risk of severe weather from central Minnesota down into eastern Nebraska. A couple of severe watch boxes around parts of the northern plains, and a separate one in the Ohio River Valley. A very active pattern across the central plains this afternoon. You can see this large area of outflow winds pushing into northern Kansas. This extends all the way from Omaha down through around Concordia and into Wakini. That's going to be the tail end storm right there on Interstate 70. Not much in between, but there in Omaha, numerous severe thunderstorm warnings. And these do have a history of wind damage. That's a look at the reflectivity. The velocity, a little bit complicated, but close to the radar, we can see some velocities in the lower atmosphere up to 50 to 60 knots. Some potential for development in the tropics as an easterly wave progresses westward on the south side of the Bermuda High. The models have been indicating some potential for development somewhere around Florida. Here's a look at the global ensemble run showing the probability of high winds, 40 miles an hour at the surface. And we can see that there's kind of an equal distribution between the eastern Gulf and the offshore areas in the Carolinas. So we really don't know where the track on this thing is going to be. The deterministic GFS, which is run at a higher resolution, has been consistently putting a tropical storm of some kind off the coast around Tampa up towards Panama City. The ECMWF has been consistently putting a track out in the Gulf Stream, but it has been bringing that further and further to the west. And you can see what it's doing right here. This is going to be the 12Z run, bringing something just west of Florida. But as I showed you on the ensembles, there is not very much confidence in these tracks. So I would not prepare based on anything you see here. I would prepare based on the fact that it is late summer and the tropics are becoming active. So if you're in the coastal regions of the southeastern U.S., right now is the time to prepare. And I'll show you the integrated vapor transport maps. This is capturing the easterly wave that's of concern that moves across the Dominican Republic and Cuba towards the weekend. And keep in mind that this is one possible scenario. This is a deterministic model. This is not necessarily going to happen. This is just one particular simulation that plays out. So in this simulation, wave starts closing off around Havana, moves into the western Gulf, and develops. Then as we get into Monday and Tuesday, tropical storm or maybe a low-end hurricane around Panama City. And then it's got kind of a slow movement, and that I think we can probably bank on. Anything that does develop will probably have a tendency towards slow movement and the possibility of flooding as well as it lingers over whatever area it is affecting. So you can see that by Thursday it's still hanging around, and even by Friday still on the coast. And finally it moves inland, but keep in mind, as I mentioned, this is one scenario. We could see a similar evolution across Florida itself, or even in the Carolinas, or we may see nothing at all. So we're just going to have to wait and see how things look on Friday and wait for the models to converge further over the weekend. I'm going to draw your attention to this forecast discussion out of Miami as well. You can see here, while there's often considerable commentary on social media platforms, it's important to obtain information from reputable media sources, and I'm sure there's probably YouTube channels hyping this storm. And I'm trying to convey to you the uncertainty of what we're seeing, because that's more realistic and more meteorologically grounded. It's always important to take precautions, but I would not buy into any specific scenario, but very likely will get active going into next week. Strong storms continue spreading into the Omaha area as we record this, and they've issued a tornado warning for much of the Omaha metro area. Looking at a possible tornado around Bennington moving northeast at 50 miles an hour. So that is a fast translation movement indicating that we've probably got a bow echo or a derecho. In fact, there's another one popping up. This thing is moving to the other side of the river. I think these are probably going to be QLCS type tornadoes, quasi-linear convective system tornadoes. Those form along the leading edge of these strong mesoscale storm complexes. So anyway, this will continue spreading into Iowa this afternoon and evening. And it definitely has the look of a strong bow echo or derecho complex. Well, let's move along and look at the forecast. There's all that activity from Omaha down into Kansas along that cold front. We go into the overnight hours, MCS, across the Quad Cities into eastern Kansas. By tomorrow morning, Cold front continues advancing into the central plains. Then as we go into tomorrow afternoon, this is kind of a new depiction. I decided to kind of label these areas. We see the heat shifting southward into Oklahoma and into North Texas, looking for a high of 105 at Wichita Falls, looking for 102 at Oklahoma City, and 101 at DFW. An enhanced risk of severe storms in the Midwest right along that warm front, and some cooler weather coming down through Minnesota, highs only in the lower 80s. Monsoon pattern continues out in the western U.S. Then we go overnight into Friday. Cold front continues to sink southward. We're going to see a few thunderstorms out there in the East Coast area between Pennsylvania and the Carolinas. Continued hot in North Texas, looking for 103 at DFW. It's going to be the hottest day of the week there. 104 at Abilene and 102 at Oklahoma City. Another chunk of heat developing up there in the northern plains, looking for 103 at Miles City and Glasgow, with 95 at Bismarck. Monsoon pattern continues out there in the western states, and a major heat wave developing in the northwestern U.S. up to 108 at Lewiston, with 107 at Pasco, 107 at Moses Lake, 104 at Spokane, 106 at Boise, and 100 at Salt Lake City. And that heat will continue into Saturday as well. There's how things look on Saturday. Another hot day in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, looking for about 100 degrees, actually 102. 102 at Austin as well, with 104 at San Angelo. There's that chunk of heat up there in South Dakota, looking for over 100 at Rapid City. And more heat developing in the southwestern U.S. up to 114 at Phoenix and 105 at Tucson. And that will continue through Sunday. The monsoon recedes a little bit into the higher elevations. There's the deterministic solution of the tropical storm making its way up into the coastal areas. This might be more of a hurricane, but again, the track is very, very uncertain, and this is one probable scenario. A fresh reinforcement of cold air coming down from Canada, cooling things down once again in the northern plains and putting another boundary through the central U.S. So wet pattern continues all the way from the northern plains down into the southeastern U.S., and we'll just wait for things to settle out for next week. One last check of the Omaha area before we get this video uploaded. We've got a radar confirmed tornado around Underwood and a couple of other tornado warnings up and down this particular BOECO cell. And of course, other activity further to the southwest, not as much severe weather on that stuff. And that is all for this edition of Forecast Lab. I do want to thank Greg for this great footage, taking a look at the Texas Hill Country just last week. That's going to be in southeastern Kerr County. Very beautiful looking at that region. Okay, hope we'll see you back here again on Friday, and we'll check out that developing tropical system and see what's new. And we'll check out weather elsewhere around the country. Take care, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.